that you're gonna play. But if you wanna stay in shape, well, you better hit the Gymwits.
That's right, man. Tell 'em.
Welcome to the Gymwits podcast. I'm Ryan George.
I'm Justin Guild, a.k.a. Chef Sonic.
And we are the Gymwits. So I realized something interesting last week, and it's that I speak too fast.
Yep.
And I'm going to try to fix that. And I'll tell you how
You're
I noticed
speaking too
this.
fast right now.
Maybe, but I'll tell you how I noticed this. So basically, I listen to a lot of podcasts, as you know, and I brought up before, way too many. And so, in order to get through all the podcasts that I listen to them at 1.5 speed. So I just naturally hear it fast. So like when my wife will listen to podcasts in the morning, she'll put it on, and then we listen to a lot of the same ones. So when I hear it, I'm like, it's jarring because I'm hearing it at normal speed and I'm not hearing it at the speed that I'm used to listening to it to. Alternatively, when I'm listening to something out loud, she's annoyed because it's going too fast. So anyway,
Most
the other
people don't
day,
listen at
I put on our
extra fast
podcast
speed.
with the one with where we talked about we had the interview we did and because there's some stuff that I actually wanted to listen to over, and I was like, wow, I'm really trying to talk too fast and I need to slow it down. So I'm going to make a conscious effort
so when you
to
listen
slow
to the Gymwits
down.
podcast, you don't have to listen at the
yeah,
at the 1.5
listening at
speed.
1.5 speed is way too fast. Like I tried to talk too fast.
Well, we always have a lot of stuff to get in,
Yeah.
so we naturally talk a little faster, and we really fill the episodes with a lot of information. Feel a lot of other
Sometimes.
podcasts, people talk slower, and while they might have a lot of information, they just it's not necessary that they get to so many different components in the podcast. It's kind of like they go where they go, depending on the style of podcast.
Yeah, it depends. I mean, there's so many at this
Yeah.
stage.
But we have so much information in our podcasts, like we will in this one, that we try to talk fast to get it all in.
That part's true, and I
We're
think just
also
in
New
general,
Yorkers,
yeah, and everything is
so
super fast. So I think
We have
I
to
do
talk
have.
fast.
We
It's
need
been
like a
read for
note
us to
on
do
your
that.
computer that just says slow.
down.
Yeah.
Or
Or
maybe
we'll-
what we should do is we should I should bounce the podcast at 0.75 speed.
That's
To
not a
slow
bad
it
idea.
down.
That's not a bad idea. Yeah, you can do that. Well, yeah. No, there was a podcast that I did listen to. I don't know why I had to listen to it slower. I'm forgetting now, but I remember. No, you know what it was? We're getting off on a tangent, completely off what we're supposed to talk about. But there was, I was in a really bad area for internet, so if
Yeah.
I listened at normal speed, it kept cutting
Oh,
off.
gotcha.
So what I had to do was listen slowly, so that like it would just keep up, like it would refresh or
That's
you know,
funny.
it would load at the rate that I was listening to it to, because at normal speed it was just too fast. But anyway, on to today's topic. So it's the Olympics, and so we got to do our kind of obligatory Olympic themed podcast. But we were thinking about doing something, but we couldn't figure it out. And then there's a common question, and we all ask, like, what's an athlete? What makes a great athlete? What's the best sport? What's the most athletic sport? And everybody has their own answer. I was talking to a guy that's a runner, and he thinks running is the best sport because he claims wrongly that he's like, well, if I punch you, I can just run and you'll never catch me. No,
But I
he's
think that's
he's a
just-
distance runner.
That's
So
a little humor from-
yeah, it's a little humor. But no, he legitimately, no, because I don't know if I've talked about. I feel like I talked. We had this discussion a long time ago, and I feel like I talked about this on the podcast, but it was a long time ago if I did. So he was he's a runner, but a distance runner.
Okay.
And his wife is a dancer. And I was saying, well, dancers are typically actually pound for pound among the best athletes.
Sure.
And he's like, no, we always have this argument. And I say runners are better athletes. And his argument was that and so it's like, well, yeah, but that's distance. So a sprinter's going to catch you. Most other athletes are going to catch you because you're not running for speed, you're running for distance.
Yeah.
So that argument right off the bat just doesn't make any sense. But either way, everybody's got their own opinion, and it's usually skewed by whatever sports they participate in, but everyone has their own opinion on what's a great athlete. So I was thinking about that myself, like, okay, what can we talk about? And it just became an interesting question
It's
because
also skewed by the popularity of the sport.
exactly. And so, but a lot of interesting questions come out of this idea of like, what's the best athlete or who makes the best athlete? So I thought, we're going to talk about, we will get into what I think and what I think you might think are the best sports or the best, most athletic sports.
When we say best, just to be clear, I believe that all sports, in terms of skill, for the most part, have equal skill. If all skills being, if all
disagree with that,
skills.
but-
Now we're not talking about athleticism or athletic skill, but the skill to execute what you're going to do. I guess somehow I know that's tricky to
that's
say.
Not the case. I don't
because-
think at all. We'll talk about that to an extent. I think the skills vary wildly. Like the skills.
How so? What do you
Okay,
mean by that? Maybe we have a different definition of skill.
Okay, at a high level. Okay, I guess so. There are different levels of skills. You've got low level skill, and then high level skill. So a low level skill would be like kicking a soccer ball. Anyone can kick a soccer ball. There's not a high degree of skill required to kick a soccer ball. Now,
What I mean is skill on
To-
the high levels.
okay, to kick now
So-
to do it at a high level is a different story. So now, versus like something that's harder, hitting a baseball. Not anybody can hit a baseball that's thrown, even at a low level. So, or not anybody can hit a baseball well. So all of a sudden, like the lower levels of that skill, it's a much higher kind of curve. It's much harder to get to that level than it would be to
Just
kicking a soccer ball.
What
Now,
I was
at the
saying,
high,
yes,
Yeah.
and I agree with you. I certainly agree with you. What I was saying was not in individual like aspects like hitting a baseball, kicking a field goal, stuff like that. I meant as in general, right? That if you're playing in any sport, the overall skill, for me, that assuming that every skill, so that we can differentiate athleticism from skill.
yeah.
Every sport requires an incredible amount of skill to execute, and I personally don't want to make this about a what skill is
Okay, I
harder.
can
Is it
understand that.
harder to hit a baseball? Is it harder to shoot basketball? Those under pressure, because in the context of the game, skills are often relative.
I'm gonna push back on that a little bit. We're gonna Well, I'm
Remember,
gonna hold
we're
off.
talking about athleticism.
Yeah,
We're not talking about
but-
skill. While they are related, they are not. They're not.
We're
one
gonna
and
hold
the
off
same.
of that for a minute because there are a couple things to consider, which is we'll get into part of the
Then there's,
questions
of
that
course,
have come up.
executing skill under athletic circumstances.
Well, the thing is, the
whole
part
thing
of
is
it
very
is
complicated.
skills generally going to be related to something like hand-eye coordination, and that's a that's an athletic component. So that
Sure.
so that becomes, is that an important component of the sport? So you might say in again, we're going to talk about this later, so I don't want to get too much into it. But let's say a sport like track, like sprint, like a 100-meter dash, hand-eye coordination is not that big of a component. But
And there
in a
is
sport
technique.
like tennis, hand-eye coordination is. So when you're kind of weighing what athletic components are involved in the sport, while skill we'll say is equal in both, there is a high degree of skill in running, more than you would think.
Sure.
While skill, let's say we weigh them equally, we at the same time we do have to admit that hand-eye coordination, which isn't a component of athleticism, it does play a significantly larger role in a sport like tennis than it does in track and field.
Sure.
So, but we'll get to that. So before we get to our kind of discussion, I'm just going to talk about like what are the components of athleticism. So why don't you throw a couple things out and then I'll complete, because it's funny when you think about it. If you just think about it without writing it down, you think a couple things. There are a few things that come to mind naturally, but there are a lot more than one would think. Well, I'll ask you first. How many do you think there are? Like how many components? And I'm not.
There's
I have a
lot of
list. Let's
there's a good amount.
try not to
of
get redundant ideas, but like, what do you think is where do you think the list is? 5, 10, 20? Like how many things? Components?
probably go, but at least between 10 to 20, 15 to 20 maybe,
Yeah, you're right. You're right in that range. I'd say.
something like that.
All right. So what? List a couple for me. Let's see.
Speed.
Yep.
Power
Yep.
and or strength. Balance. Hand-eye coordination.
Mm-hmm.
Physical toughness.
Okay.
Endurance. Mental strength.
Mm-hmm.
You could say proprioception, although I guess you could say that goes in with balance.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Muscle endurance.
Okay.
Mm,
All right. Well, that's a good.
There's certainly more, but
It's good
you
offhand
get-
list. I'm going to give you
Okay.
So I'll give you the list. So speed is like almost every sport requires some level of speed.
Mhm.
Agility is an important
Agility.
component in a lot of sports. Quickness, is another
What's the
important
difference
component.
between quickness and speed?
Yeah, they're closely linked. I think agility, if you think like someone who's agile, like can do things that involve kind of
Absolute
change
balance.
of direction.
Yep.
With speed, I typically think of that. So somebody, if you're quick, you can do certain movements fast, like rapidly. Where someone who's agile
Like
can
you
do
always hear
rapid
the
change
quick
of
shortstop who's not fast.
Yeah,
The ball's hit,
exactly.
he can quickly get to
Exactly,
it, but
like-
he's not necessarily a fast runner.
yeah, like almost quick reaction time. But which is another one I didn't even consider
Reaction
reaction
time,
time.
yeah.
Huh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll keep that and we'll put reaction time into quickness. But so I think that they're closely linked. But I would say that's kind of the difference between between agility and quickness. Then you got strength. So strength is your overall ability to move weight, which is different from power and explosiveness because power and explosiveness, which I kind of group together, involve a component of time.
Yeah.
So doing things that involve where you're moving in a large amount of weight in a fast time. So if you and I throw a 10-pound medicine ball, but it takes me a certain a second to throw it, where you can explode and do it in 0.2 of a second, then you're going to be more powerful.
Powerful actually almost has more in the speed category than than it does.
Power
in the
is kind of like it's like combining basically combining speed and strength.
Yeah.
So you can have people who are very strong but not very powerful or not very explosive, and then you can have people who are very explosive but not very strong. So there are people who can do things very fast with certain weights, but then if you give them something, it varies. Sure. So but they're different, and they're going to make a difference in certain sports.
Sure.
So and even within sports, it's kind of inter sports. All right, so then you have like kind of skill, which we were talking about. So that's a component, but I think if we kind of leave that out, we'll say like hand-eye coordination and dexterity are aspects that are going to give you, they kind of are linked. So I put hand-eye coordination and dexterity together. But hand-eye coordination is a very important athletic component, especially in sports like basketball, tennis, etc. Then you have balance, and then as you mentioned, balance / proprioception. So your balance, proprioception is kind of proprioception is your awareness of where you are in space, which is a huge component in a lot of sports, especially like wrestling, anything where you're using your body and moving in awkward positions and that require balance. Like proprioception is huge. So sports like wrestling, parts of football, basketball, all require a high degree of proprioception. So that's also a very important athletic component that people don't consider. Then you have flexibility, which is important. More important in some sports than others. Gymnasts are going to need to be more flexible than a football player, but football players need to be flexible. There's the balance that's necessary. Then you have endurance. So then you have like kind of different kinds of endurance. You have your anaerobic endurance. So that's just your ability to generate maximum force very quickly. So it lasts about 12 seconds. You have the kind of anaerobic glycolytic, which is up to 2 minutes. So being able to sustain a high degree of work, but that's very limited. And then you have your aerobic, which is then 2 minutes plus. So you're going to have some combination of those three for almost every sport. But weightlifting is going to be more in the anaerobic realm. Where something like soccer is going to be more aerobic / aerobic glycolytic, because you do need, while a soccer player is constantly moving over the course of a game, they still need bursts of energy and bursts of explosiveness. So you're not, with the energy systems, you're not only, even though there are kind of three systems, you're never just relying on one system. You're kind of using some combination with the three at any given time. Then there's your recovery ability, mixed with durability. So again, they can be separate, but you've got the ability to within a game or a match recover. So let's say you're playing football. Football's short bursts of explosiveness, but they need to be able to recover quickly in order to perform in the next play. So you may go all out. If you're a lineman, you go all out to block your opponent, and you're putting in a ton of effort for a very short period of time. People like to make fun of football. They're working for a few seconds at a time, but it's the amount of effort that some football players put into that short amount of time is incredible. So to be able to recover your energy and be able to react or act with the same amount of explosiveness and the same amount of force, it takes an incredible amount of durability. But then you also have durability over the course of a season. So we might not think of like baseball players as as durable athletes, but they play 162 games a year. They're playing every day, so you have to be durable. And you're traveling, you're playing, the mental fatigue, the physical stress. A baseball swing is still a violent movement. A pitch, a throw is still a violent movement. So it requires a high level of durability to play baseball, or to compete in tennis. So durability becomes another athletic component. Got a couple more. So now then there's kind of neuromuscular control. So this kind of goes into proprioception. Your brain's ability to control. But I guess you know what? I'm going to take that out. That's kind of that kind of goes into like proprioception and hand-eye coordination. So we're going to take that out. But then you've got like again kind of drive and mental strength, toughness, focus. Those all I kind of put into one thing. But those are all components of an athlete. Like you need to be tough, you need to have focus, you need mental strength. And then I put one that's not commonly used, but depending on the sport, teamwork is also a part of it.
Oh,
do you play well with others?
Ability to.
So that's what I got. I have other things like conditioning and physical fitness I've seen on different lists, but I feel like all of these components together are going to lead to good conditioning or good, physical fitness. So I didn't feel like really including them on the list. Not that this is like this is the list, but these are kind of the different components that you have to consider when you're talking about what makes a good athlete. So I guess the question I have for you is, what is an athlete? What's your definition of an athlete?
all of what you just said.
Yeah.
All right.
What do you think of? Like, because there's a dictionary definition.
If I were to put it into a simple term, it would be to someone who is able to execute a skill under physical conditions, under competitive circumstances.
Okay. So, yeah, the dictionary definition is person who is trained or skilled in exercises, sports, or games requiring physical strength, agility, and stamina. So, kind of there. That's the definition. I think that's
then again, the people that the dictionary definition are not necessarily made by people that are experts in the field.
Yeah.
Right. So if you were to get the definition from experts, you might get it. You would see here some of the same words, but it might be a little different.
Okay, so I would say here's my definition. I just came up with this, so I'm working on it. Might not be great, but like kind of a person, like an athlete, is a person who uses their body as a tool to complete a task, or complete a physical task, maybe. Because if you think about it, any athlete, your body. I mean, yes, you may be using your body to then use another tool, but your body is being used to complete a task.
There has to be more of
a physical task.
There has to be more of a sporting or an implication of a tougher
in a competitive setting. Use your
even
body.
More than that, though, because your body completes many tasks. Right, there has to be more of a physical element. There has to be something that shows that the competition is of a physical nature.
Okay.
That the task, it's not about completing the task, but completing a physical task, either against yourself, against the time, or against someone else who is attempting to do the same task or prevent you from doing that task. So something along those lines.
Does an athlete need a sport? Can you be like, what if you're just a guy in the gym, but you're just really fast? You can jump high.
You can be athletic.
Yeah,
athletic. You can be athletic. You can be an athlete.
Yeah.
So, which also factors into the definition of someone who has the ability to perform at a sport or a fitness-related task.
Okay. All right. So now.
Something along those lines.
That's
it's
fair.
It's sort of it's one of those weird words that
we all
everyone
know.
Understands what it means, but it's actually quite difficult to define.
Yeah. All right. So let's get into some of the interesting questions that I just came up with, like kind of going through this. So, and I'll ask you. So the first one is like kind of the chicken or the egg question. So basically, does the sport create the athletes, or do the athletes make the sport? So
it's a great question. And it doesn't only factor, it doesn't only factor into sports and athletic abilities. It's a question for life. When someone is a great artist, or even, or you could say is a great artist, does the type of art they do, are they good at it because they're good at that, or would they be good at anything? Like a musician, is it the instrument, Or would they be good at anything? Or does it differ
Let's say, okay,
for different people?
You got a good question.
Because
So
people are a prodigy at an instrument. They just pick something up and they're great. If they picked up another instrument, would they be great?
would you have had the technical proficiency that you have at guitar if you didn't start by playing heavy metal and playing things that were where
the
you did
genre.
require you played things that required a high degree of skill and difficulty with your fingers. Obviously, I'm sure there's other aspects of your.
You could say that, but you could also say, what if I chose to play the drums?
Yeah.
For me personally, I think that, I would have been, I would have been good at whatever instrument I chose to do. But then there's the question: what if I chose? So that shows maybe I'm artistic or I'm good musically. What if I chose to do a different type of art? What if I tried to be good at dance?
Mm-hmm.
I would not be as good.
I've seen you dance. No.
I would not be as good. I've gotten better at dancing.
Not a natural. You were a great, good drummer. So like I can assume I assume that you could pick up any instrument and you would have been proficient at an instrument because I've seen you play drums and you pick things up quick. You have a great musical ear, but I've seen you dance. So
or what about visual art? What if I tried? So I'm a good artist and I think artistically, but I'm terrible when it comes to like a visual art. I'm just not good at it. So there's a case where within a certain type of art, I would be good. So you could say that certain athletes might be good within a certain types of sports. Like Michael Jordan, for instance, was an incredible athlete, and not much is known about his baseball career.
Yeah.
But they said by the end of his baseball career, before he went back to basketball, he was getting good, and that he would eventually made it to the major leagues.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I never heard that.
It's not there's not very much known about it. There's a great documentary, a 30 for 30 on it.
Really, there is.
Yeah, really, really cool.
Wow.
It's called Jordan Rides the Bus.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's great. It's
I
really
just
cool.
watched a good one on Darryl Strawberry and Dwight Gooden.
Yeah, that one was so
that was
good.
so hard. That was
It's
hard
so
to
sad.
watch.
I know. It was hard to watch.
I mean, it's good. It looks like Strawberry's got his head on straight, but
I guess.
that was tough.
I know. I know. It's good stuff.
Yeah, just watched it this weekend. Oh, yeah. All right. Well,
So you could say with certain athletes that they would be good at anything, but I don't know if that's true. But I think that certain athletes might be good at a lot of different sports.
Okay.
So maybe an athlete that is explosive and fast and agile might have been good at football or basketball or something like that. Doesn't mean they'd necessarily be good at distance running.
Okay. So the athlete's gonna
within a certain type of sport, they might be good at. Yeah. So people say, oh, they would be good at whatever sport they tried. I don't know if that's true, but definitely, if someone is naturally a really good athlete by the standards that we're saying, or at least have certain combination of the qualities that we're mentioning. Although it depends on which qualities you're mentioning.
Yeah, well,
and we know that genetics play a role. If you have the high twitch fibers, if you're just born that way, you're going to be better at sports that are more explosive.
Yeah.
And if you have the low twitch, more endurance-based, marathon running, long-distance swimming, maybe triathlon, stuff like that. So certainly athletes might not, if you're quote-unquote natural athlete, you might not be good at every sport, but certainly certain groups of sports that require those attributes, you could probably do any of them. And maybe one of them you're just naturally the best at because it calls to you or you enjoy it. But certainly the really high-level athletes would probably be good at almost anything within their sort of genre of sports.
Okay, so that brings me like another question. I think you touched on it, then ran away from it, but it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
As far as like, okay, what's the better athlete? When we talk about, okay, what's the best athlete? Who's the best athlete? So some sports, like let's say track and field, or specifically, let's say the 100-meter or the long jump, have a very specific skill, like one major skill that the person has to be incredibly good at. And then not as many other components are necessary. Obviously you need a little bit of everything to play any sport, but like you need a high level at one skill versus a sport like basketball where you don't need to be elite, like you don't need a super high level of any one skill, but you need to be pretty good at a number of different skills. So what makes for a better athlete? Like if you're gonna say like Usain Bolt, is he a better athlete than LeBron James? He's the fastest human being on the planet.
Personally,
by far.
I would say I would say that he's not even in the same league as LeBron James.
Okay, so you would say that
even though he's incredibly fast, I think that. But although I don't know this for a fact, maybe you put Usain on a basketball floor and he would be really good.
Yeah.
Maybe he would be.
But just going by what we've seen, we're not going to make any assumptions. But what we've seen, he's got one singular skill which is better than anybody in the world. maybe ever, versus somebody
Same
like
thing
LeBron
with Michael
James,
Phelps,
who's at same
is
thing. Michael Phelps, put him in the same. Is LeBron James a better athlete than them?
I mean, I would say yes, just because LeBron James might be the best singular athlete on the planet in general. Like LeBron, and not just because he plays basketball, because maybe he's just a freak. Like he's 6'9", and his balance and strength and power, speed, it's. I mean, he's a god among men. Although you could say the same thing about Usain Bolt is a god among men. Michael Phelps is a god among men.
Yeah.
So, I think at least it's one of those questions that has no right answer.
So no, that's
This one really comes down to opinion, whether you think that having a wide skill set is more important or better at having one very particular skill.
Now the other thing
it's just that depends on
when
on
you
the
consider
person.
it. I think when you think, if you just ask somebody the question like who's the best athlete in the world, I think that Michael Phelps and like Usain Bolt will come up first before LeBron James often, but I wonder how much of it is that people genuinely think these are the best athletes, and how much of it is that every 4 years we get the Olympics, and for a very short period of time during those 4 years they are put on a stage and on a pedestal higher than anybody else, and then they come back down and you don't hear about them for another 4. I mean, you do, but you don't really. They're not
and
put on
only
the same
top
pedestal.
Of the best of the, Michael
where
Phelps you might hear because he's in the news.
where LeBron James is always there. He's always around. So we know him as being a great athlete in his sport. But then the Olympics is kind of there's this part of it, it's all the greatest athletes in the world competing against each other. So we get this in our head that they are the best. But I get what you're saying, and I it's hard. It's a tough decision. Like which one is who's the better athlete? I would tend to agree with you. I'm going to say
well, here's something to think about, and this might help you decide when they conduct the world's strongest man.
Yeah.
They determine the world's strongest man not by just who can deadlift the most weight. That's not the world's strongest man. The world's strongest man is a lot of every attribute that you can assign to strength, meaning power, endurance, explosivity, just regular, strength, lifting strength, all different types of strength. That is your world's strongest man is the guy that can do all of those. So under that under those guidelines, the athlete that is most well-rounded would be considered the best.
Okay.
Under that sort of circumstance, but is that the guideline by which to go by?
I don't know.
Now the title of the world's best athlete is generally goes to the winner of the decathlon.
Yeah.
Like he usually gets the title, the world's best athlete, because he excels at 10 different sports.
Yeah.
So, and which include, which have a bunch of different attributes.
Yeah.
So I think that the world sort of agrees that having an assortment of different attributes is probably what makes you the best athlete. I think that's the general consensus.
Yeah. That's fair. And then I guess that comes to another thing, which is because I'm thinking, you think about, the decathlon is a sport that probably has the highest kind of combination of skills. And if you take everything into account, each individual event has its own specific skill requirements. But do they really have the best athletes, or is that just the athletes that are left over that are willing to do the sport? You know what I mean? Like, so that's the next thing that comes to mind is if you're like, I'd asked you this before. If you're a kid and you're in high school and you run really fast, you're incredibly fast, are you going to run track and field, or are you going to play football? Or which is your focus going to be? Because at the end of the day, football is where, in America, you're going to make, maybe in other countries it might be soccer, but football is where you're going to make money. Track and field, you're not necessarily going to make money. So that there's kind of like a gravitational pull. Some sports have more of a pull than others. So they almost like suck the really highest level athletes away, where they might be the best in the world at one sport. They don't get to do that because, at the end of the day, only a very, very small number of track and field athletes will be hugely successful financially, where if you play a couple years in the NFL, you're looking at a good amount of money and a potential retirement and pension and all that good stuff. So
It's once again another classic question that we always wonder about. First off, with sports like football and basketball, there is a size factor. So it also has to imply that you're big enough to play those sports. It also implies that you are tough enough to play those sports, especially football. You have to be incredibly tough to play those sports, and a little lucky, because a lot of people get injured and just have the end of their careers. Some people are just not inclined. They might be fast. They might be fast sprinters, but they're just not built to play a sport like that for whatever reason. And that's where concepts like having endurance durability, toughness, mental toughness. Not that there isn't mental toughness to be a sprinter or a runner. So that's that's a thought. We love to say that that the mixed martial artists are the best athletes in the world, but it's a weird concept. Often MMA gets sort of the leftovers from the other sports, either people that are retired at football, or maybe they were NCAA wrestlers and now they need another career
Well,
path.
it's interesting because it's almost a negative thing when you consider, because you've got high-level athletes in other sports that have competed in MMA and been successful. So is that good for MMA or bad for MMA?
Well, when you say other sports,
I mean,
mainly
I guess
other
combat sports. That's
There
fair.
are only a couple that have maybe in football, very, very few, and then they have.
And they were a lot because you're huge and athletic.
And a lot because they're huge and athletic.
And so
exactly.
they would have excelled in any
and
sport.
they're
So that's
weights.
fair. Yeah, you don't get many like ex-pro football players fighting at like 155 pounds or something. So okay, fair enough.
So and at the lighter, remember, things change at the lighter weights because the bigger people go and play football and basketball. So now now there's a sport where that's now and we're talking. Where you can be smaller. I guess soccer is a sport where you don't have to be huge.
Boxing.
Boxing is one. Another one where we're talking worldwide.
Yeah.
Where you don't have to be huge in order to be a professional athlete and make money at that sport.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that plays into it is your size.
So sorry to cut you off, but what do you think about transferability? So basically, if you're looking at your criteria for like what makes the best athlete or the best sport or the most athletic sport, does transferability of skills mean anything? So we were talking about people transferring their skills from other sports to MMA. So let's say a sport like football, the skills required for football, speed, power, strength, those are all things that can transfer easily to other sports. So is that something that's important to making a good athlete? Like that if you're good at this sport, that means that you can probably be good at any number of other sports because your skills transfer over to something else, or not? Or does that matter?
I think that's of somewhat importance. Once again, it kind of goes back to that earlier discussion that we had, that if you have certain athletic abilities within a genre of sports, whether sports that need explosivity, power, strength, then you're going to be good probably at a lot of sports that are like that. But if you're a endurance or a marathon runner, there's a chance that if you learn the technique, you might also be a good long-distance swimmer.
Yeah.
So I think it kind of goes back to that idea that, yes, that is important if your skills can transfer to other skills within that sort of within the genre of sports that your skills could apply to.
Yeah. And then there's another question that I was considering, that so you have a sport like football. I guess the question is like, which sports require athleticism, like require just to participate, you have to be athletic or you have to have a certain level of ability, versus ones that just to participate, don't require it. So you think, we think football players among the best athletes in the world, but to play football doesn't require that much athleticism. We can go to the park right now, get a bunch of people together, and we can play football. It won't look good. It can be ugly if and depending on the type of athletes that are there, pretty bad.
That's a great question.
But then say something like gymnastics,
right, is
like
one where
that you have to be athletic to do anything gymnastics related. You got to be athletic. You can't just do it. You can't just participate without having some degree of athleticism. And now you can train up to it, but the kind of barrier to entry is much higher in some sports than others. So again, does that play into your decision making process on when you're thinking about what makes an athletic sport a great athlete? Is like, again, I can get on a field and run. I can cut. I can do some things. Like I could shoot a basketball. I could dribble.
Think about it.
Not any of this at a high level, but
most sports anyone can just play. There's very few that are like gymnastics.
I'd say golf.
I mean, anyone can hit it. Doesn't mean you'll be good at it, but anyone can hit it. So it's sort of
with any level of like accuracy.
Baseball.
Again, same thing. Can anybody hit a base?
No, but that's a skill. But now we're going into we're going into the realm of
hand-eye
skill,
coordination. So
which is fine. That's part of it. But we're going
that's
into
athleticism. Hand-eye coordination is athletic.
No,
that's the athletic. The part that makes it hard for you to hit a golf ball properly or hit a baseball properly is hand-eye coordination.
Yeah, which is important. But that's going into the realm of skill. If we're talking about from pure athletic standpoint, yes, gymnastics is a tough one. That's something you have to, but there's a lot of skill in that too. So it's one of those things you have to have started at a really sort of young age and learn how to do that. Although I guess it's not true, because there's some really good athletes that can like do flips, and you can just
George
tell.
St. Pierre?
Yeah, GSP would be good at gymnastics, and some people even use gymnastics to cross train with.
Yeah, that's true. And then I guess this isn't so much of a question as I guess talking like. Actually, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So let's stay away from that.
All right.
I guess the last question that came to mind is we talked a little bit about, do we weigh every component equally? Does power get equal weight as agility, or does hand-eye coordination weigh equally to strength? Like does all the components we talked about, if we're weighing them to determine what makes a great athlete, do they get weighed equally, or do some things just like we tend to think of strength, power, agility, speed as like the main components of athleticism? Obviously, through talking, we realize there are a lot more components, but do they all get weighed equally, or do we put some higher than others? When we think of an athlete, we think of LeBron James. We don't think of Dale Earnhardt Jr., who's like
some people do.
No, I'm not. I do as well.
Yeah,
I'm just saying that the kind of image of an athlete, the ideal of an athlete.
Oftentimes, the
is
ideal
gonna
athlete,
fit
you
more
start thinking of a runner,
LeBron
even
James.
though,
Yeah, exactly. You
or
start
sometimes you might
thinking
go to an
of
Olympic athlete, or someone throwing a javelin.
So you're thinking that you're not thinking a race car driver or a golfer or I know we argued about this a little bit, a billiards player. Like you're not thinking that. You're thinking of these sports that just require these high degree of just speed, power. We're thinking that. So that's the question. So I guess my question for you is: do we weigh everything equally, or do some things just naturally get weighed higher or weighed more?
It's almost an impossible question to answer, because so much of it depends on the sport that the person is participating in, right? Someone's skill in golf, they might not be a great athlete, but their skill has allowed them to make millions and millions of dollars because they can hit a golf ball.
Yeah.
Same with certain other. Same thing with, say, like a punter in the NFL. You don't even think of them as much, or someone who hits a field goal. I don't know of many kickers. Adam Vinatieri is the famous kicker. Was on I forget what team he's on now. He was on the Patriots. He won them some Super Bowls. Right. I don't know how great of an athlete he is. I'm sure he's a decent athlete, but his whole thing in life is kicking field goals. So that one skill has made him a rich man, and he's done that for years and years and years.
Yeah.
So it's hard to argue. It's you're good at this one skill, and you made millions and millions of dollars because of it.
But I guess we seem to intuitively know that he's not the same level athlete as running back. Like we kind of know that the skills required. I guess
not the
skill required is high, but the athleticism required is not the same as other sports. But then he does have a higher degree of skill than than many running backs, if you consider it. I mean, now obviously running backs have insane agility and speed and quickness and strength and all that good stuff. But like as far as just the hand-eye coordination needed, hand-leg, I guess, hand-foot coordination.
And ability to act under
huge.
pressure and make...
But let's say those are all equal. But we say he's got a high degree of hand-eye coordination required. I guess the football player has a proprioception that they also need. So, it's interesting, like what does get weighed over others.
And it's so situational.
Yeah.
It's so situational. I don't know if you can weigh one more than the other. but to be someone to be able to play on a level like a LeBron James would require you to have an incredible amount of like if you were a video game, like being able to
High attributes, yeah.
to assign your attributes in a
Yeah.
lot of different fields.
That's
LeBron James, just in order to be on that level, you would have to have a lot of different.
That's a good criteria,
Yeah.
actually, right? Like just like if you're in a video game, like you need like your levels to be high.
You can assign. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so the last couple things we'll talk about this, and I'll go to my like what I consider to be the best, and you can tell me what you
Yep.
think about my list. Is there some sports that are just kind of singular in nature? So we were talking about like things that the skills aren't.
Sure,
like,
all the
they're
you
super
know,
athletic, but
know,
they're
all the track,
They don't like you got,
swimming,
like, track, swimming,
even if you do
weightlifting.
different stuff. Yeah, weightlifting,
Powerlifting, NASCAR. I was saying to an extent, like they're
I
certain.
don't know enough about that.
Yeah, well,
I know that there's great skill and athletic.
like the
there's
amount of G
athletic
forces that they're dealing with is huge. So
there's
their
balance. I
conditioning
know their
actually has to be
conditioning
important.
has to be
Their
good.
cardiovascular, their endurance has to be good. So there's actually a lot required.
There's
You got,
so many
like even
sports.
triathletes. We think of triathletes as great athletes, and they are. But think about it. Like the main athletic component is their endurance.
Sure.
Like obviously you have to be able to swim, but they don't. They're the swimming. They just have to be. It's like they have to get from point A to point B. They, biking, the running. Like the technique has to be good, but they don't need a high degree of like skill. But they need the endurance. They need the
Yeah.
muscle
Well,
endurance.
that's what it
They
is.
need durability.
Well, think
So
about
like,
all these.
but so now they're considered amongst the best athletes because what they do requires such high levels of durability. But are they really better athletes than again a high level basketball player or a high level football player?
I think that according to the whole world's strongest man theory, where if you have to take a bunch of different attributes, would be no, they're not.
Okay, all right.
That they're
so-
very good endurance wise.
Yeah.
Once again, it's so based on opinion.
Yeah.
What do you consider an important athlete? Now think about all of these sports, all racing sports, and there's lots of one. Speed skating.
Yeah.
Biking.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Then think about all the skill games, shooting, archery,
Yeah.
like all those types of what you would consider a singular sport. Obviously, any type of weightlifting, a pole vault,
Yeah.
like stuff like that. Well, maybe there's a few little different components within them. It's generally a what you would consider a singular sport.
Yeah.
Once again, does that make them less of an athlete?
No, I don't know. It's a good. I don't have much of an answer. I think I would say yes personally. I think that I agree with the kind of world's strongest man idea
So you think that it takes that the best athletes have a combination of attributes.
You kind of like an amalgam of the different attributes to for me, but not to take away from those sports.
Sure,
or
of
their
course.
abilities, because obviously again, I have never run a triathlon or competed in a triathlon, and
Yeah.
I don't think I have the durability to do it.
Yep.
So it's not taking away from it, but I do think that for me, I would want a little bit more well-rounded, especially just at a high level. So now, I guess one more question before I get to the list is, what athletes require the least athleticism? I mean, what sports require the least athleticism?
Golf.
Golf. Yeah. There's explosive power is necessary, hand-eye
A
coordination.
little bit.
But not much else. I mean, not a lot else, obviously.
Any of the skill sports like shooting, while there of course
Fair
there is
enough.
some athletic ability. Yes, you have to have some
Concentration,
athletic
hand-eye
ability.
coordination.
And there's endurance and control and stuff like that. Archery. That yes, of course, there's great skill, incredible skill involved, and some athletic ability. You're not going to
What
sell
about
me.
baseball? People always knock baseball. What do you think? Do you think does it deserve that rep that it gets as kind of like, oh, you can be a fat guy and pitch, like or
Well, the pitchers are the best athletes. They
general,
always say that. The announcers
yeah,
who are baseball
but
players always
you can
say
also
that.
get the worst athletes can be pitchers too.
I think they're I don't know about that. They might look like bad athletes, but they're often quick and agile, and more so than one would realize.
Yeah.
Baseball's a widely skilled sport, but there are athletic components.
Yeah,
And
you
once
need
again,
to-
you mentioned the durability of having to play that many games and travel, and there are bits where you have to explode
Yeah.
and you have to make. There are athletic plays. I've been to a bunch of baseball games recently, and it was funny. There was a guy on the Mets who's filling in right now for their everyday shortstop. I don't know if he'll ever be a great major league player, and he might be just a mainly AAA guy. A guy who gets called up, maybe sits on the bench most of his career. And the ball was hit to him, and he made an incredibly athletic play. It was hit to him in short. He jumped up, he caught the ball, and then threw to first. And even him, who we might not consider a great baseball player or a great athlete, made this beautiful, graceful throw to first and catch and jumping in one motion. Yeah. So even this guy, who you might not consider an incredible athlete, made this beautiful, graceful play.
Yeah. Okay.
So it shows that baseball players, especially now, although now there's another discussion, the athletes today are better than they used to be. And that even baseball players, because they know that it will aid you to be a better athlete. So the athletes are stronger and more agile and fit, and they train this sort of stuff.
All right. Well, I'm going to get to what I think is my list of like the most athletic sports. So I'm going to say my honorable mention. I'm going to have two kind of honorable mentions that were close to what ended up being my kind of number 5. And again, anyone listening, you're probably going to not disagree with me on some of these. Again, I didn't include like the decathlon in my list, which I know should have been. But anyway, my two honorable mentions are rugby and soccer. So both sports basically require a high level of endurance. Rugby both require high durability, but rugby especially requires durability and toughness at ridiculous levels.
And if you didn't mention, you got to throw water polo in there with rugby. Okay, no one knows it is such a tough, hard sport. Violent.
Well, we talk toughness is a different thing. Like if you were just
incredibly athletic.
So, but they both require agility, a decent high level of skill, conditioning, speed. The reason why I put basketball over is I think basketball requires all of that. Maybe not the same level of toughness, and maybe not quite the same level of endurance as soccer, but the explosiveness, the speed, the hand-eye coordination, the skill, the agility, the endurance. Those are just things that you get in basketball that you don't get in soccer.
Sure.
And again, soccer's a great sport and requires, like, the athletes are tremendous, but I just feel like basketball, that added bit of explosiveness and power and the skills and the agility required, just put that a little bit in front for me of rugby and soccer. So my next on the list I have is football, American football.
Okay.
So basically, I feel like that has the most transferability of like high level skills.
Yep.
Like high level football pplayers are incredibly strong. They're as strong as some high level weightlifters. They're incredibly powerful.
Some are very fast.
Their speed, right? Some receivers' speed is up there with the highest level track.
Yep.
Runners. Their agility is ridiculous. Even the biggest linemen, their feet move like ballet dance. Like they're just insane. Their quickness, and then to go together with their, again, a high level of durability, the power and explosiveness that they have to have, the toughness that they have to have. I feel like it's just unmatched in any sport. And I think
so. You're saying while football doesn't require the most athleticism, it gets the best athletes.
Yeah, and just if you look at professional football, the best athletes are there.
Yeah.
Money's
there.
If you watch the combines and you watch their training camps, the stuff that they do is just ridiculous. Like they do things. You're right. Like that's why you like in MMA there have been football players who've been fairly successful in MMA because they're just such great athletes. And again, we could argue about whether or not there's the gravitational pull of the best athletes going to football, which I think there is, versus football, because I don't think that it requires the most athleticism, but it gets the most, and because there's the most money going into football, I think it probably has the best trainers, their training camps are different, so I do feel like they've got I think it gets the best athletes, and we see that, and the things that they're capable of, I think just, for me, puts that sport higher. Okay, so then, actually number 2 on my list is tennis. So the reason why I have tennis is it's got an incredibly high level of durability. It can play up to 3-4 hour games where throughout the game they need all 3 levels of endurance. They have to be explosive constantly, but they have to maintain this over the course of a few hours. But they also have to maintain a fairly high level of back and forth, running back and forth. There's incredible skill and incredible hand-eye coordination required. Their agility and quickness, again, are elite level, at incredibly high levels. So I feel like the level of toughness and durability required for tennis, along with the other athletic components, for me, just puts it a little bit ahead of football. Plus the fact that tennis as a sport requires those all of those components.
Although everyone plays, like, people play tennis.
Fair enough,
for older
but
ages.
although I suck at like even me playing tennis is like I'm
Well,
terrible.
then
but it's a skill.
how come you could see? Then how come people can play tennis until they're 90? You can't play tackle football.
Well, I guess
till you're 90.
it comes to the low barrier of entry. So there's a lower barrier of entry to playing tennis.
Yep.
But at the high levels, like to play it, I just feel like they're as athletes are up there.
Yep.
Probably just a little bit ahead, but you can argue both. I think football it could be placed ahead of tennis.
Mm-hmm.
So number 2 on the list is gymnastics, which now you can probably figure out what my number 1. Any listener could probably figure out, if you're a regular listener, could probably figure out what number 1 is. But gymnastics, I think, is up there, maybe even number 1. Just that the requirement, like the barrier to entry, is higher than almost any other sport.
Mm-hmm.
Not any other sport, but it's incredibly high. You have to have some level of athleticism to do it. It requires incredible strength. Like kind of pound for pound, strength is rivals any other sport.
Mm-hmm.
It requires incredible flexibility, incredible balance and control and proprioception. It requires incredible explosiveness, durability, mental strength. So
Toughness,
the thing is, all the components that are required for like gymnastics or gymnasts are at high levels. Like you can't be like to do it compete at a high level. You can't be like weak and be a gymnast.
Yeah.
You can't have mediocre balance and be a gymnast. Like for all of these components, you have to be incredible at. So I feel like that
there's one
is
thing that isn't. There's no component of, and there's no component of aerobic.
I would disagree.
Where's the aerobic?
Well, for routines, like someone that require routines, they absolutely need to. Are you kidding?
I guess so.
I mean, it's not the same level as like a marathon runner,
Sure.
but you absolutely need it.
All right. No, it does. It does.
So then, number 1 on the list, what do you think?
It's going to be your MMA combat sports.
Combat sport. I think I was going to say wrestling, but I think I
very similar.
But MMA, any kind of combat sport. Again, I'm
biased.
biased.
I wouldn't say like taekwondo.
Okay, fine.
Is quite.
All right. Well, we'll say MMA.
The tougher
just
combat
to
sports.
leave it to the side, we'll say MMA. The reason why I put it number 1, and again, it could fit. Any of these really can be number 1. Is it requires mental strength and durability that I don't think any other sport requires the durability and mental strength that it has. There's a component of you're not only competing, but you're competing against somebody who's trying to hurt you and knock you out. So I guess football has some level of that, but this is like very straightforward. It's direct. Like the person across is trying to hurt you. The level of strength. High level of strength, high level of conditioning and endurance, like things that you can't not have high levels of endurance and compete at any reasonable level. The skill is also incredibly high, and it's skill in a number of different areas. So it's not just striking, but it's grappling and it's submissions. Like they have a high degree of skill.
Both aerobic and anaerobic.
Yeah, exactly. You need aerobic, you need anaerobic power, the durability, you need explosiveness. So I feel like the highs aren't as high as any other sport, but the combination of skills that are required to compete, to me, put it above anything else, especially when you consider, again, the durability and the mental strength. And, yes, it's probably not the most athletic. If you're just looking at like the strength and power and everything, you probably have to give that to football. But I think if you take into account the other things like the skill set and the durability and the mental strength and just the combination of skills.
There's not one athletic attribute. And the skill.
That's what I was going to get to.
There's not one
actually.
athletic attribute that is
for
MMA
touched
on.
Requires a good deal of everything we talked about earlier, from speed, agility, quickness, strength, power, skill, balance, hand-eye coordination. Maybe not quite as much, but still hand-eye coordination.
Tremendous hand-eye
coordination.
coordination.
Right, yeah. Flexibility, endurance, all 3 levels of endurance, recovery, durability, conditioning, neuromuscular control, drive, mental strength, motivation, even teamwork, because you have to train with like all of those components are all necessary for MMA. So I think that's what really puts it over the top for me. Is that it requires everything. It's the one sport that you need everything, and I think some of the other sports you can get away without having certain components, not MMA. So that's my list. What do you think? Any thoughts?
I think that sounds good. Sounds good to me. One thing to think about is how much does popularity drive these lists. I was looking at a bunch of lists online, and they all so many of them put swimming as one of the hardest sports. I'm like, no, it's not. I've swam a lot. It's tough. It's not as hard as fighting or wrestling. It's just not. Period. I'm sorry. It's not. Done. So, right.
Are we talking most athletic or just hardest?
Just they said I've seen toughest, hardest, most athletic. They're not. I'm sorry. They're great athletes, but they're not. So that's just the way it is.
I think- I guess
Another
so-
honorable mention is ice hockey. I think is very similar to football and basketball.
Yeah.
It's very tough. It's nonstop. It's the same concept of back and forth, explosive, lots of strength, speed, endurance,
skill.
toughness, tons of skill, hands-on. So I think that gets a mention in there. Lacrosse also kind of because it is not looked upon as a very tough sport. It's actually
It's
incredibly
incredibly hard. Yeah.
incredibly tough sport. So I think that popularity sometimes plays a role. I mentioned water polo. I didn't even really know this. I was looking up water polo, and apparently it is a vicious,
Yeah.
violent, tough sport. It's very similar to basketball. You're treading water the whole time.
Mhm.
You're not standing. You're treading water.
Yeah.
So you have to have this incredible endurance. And they're constantly hitting each other and elbowing, and it's a tough sport. So I think that no one knows about water polo. Another interesting sport that I was thinking about, and I just don't know, really, is the equestrian, right? You would think that might be similar to race car driving.
No.
I hear a lot of people that say that it's quite a difficult
Yeah, I
sport.
can imagine it's difficult.
So, and not just for the horse, that you have to have balance and
Yeah.
control, and it's really a lot of strength and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's some sports that I don't personally know
Well,
about.
I think it's important to respect every sport because I hate when people kind of dismissive of some sports. Like again, some people say, "Oh, baseball players can be fat and play baseball, or golfers aren't athletes," or even any sport. I think every sport has some requirements that make it difficult, make their athletes real athletes. Like even,
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a sport, but pro wrestling, like.
Oh, no, absolutely.
Or
They
even
have to be
dancers. Like I
incredible.
think, like I said
Well,
before,
dancers are
dancers
incredible
among the best
athletes.
athletes.
Yeah.
Depending on the style of dance, or cheerleaders, or amazing.
Well, cheerleading
athletes.
is a sport.
So yeah,
you know.
so there are some sports that you kind of initially will be dismissive of, but it's like no, they're ridiculous. Like dancers, are amazing
Sure.
athletes. So
Absolutely.
I hate being dismissive of any sport, but you're right. There are some sports that are maybe not so popular, so we don't consider them. When we
Here's
think
my
of,
one gripe with tennis,
what?
and I know that it's physically so demanding. I find it to be very one-dimensional. That
How?
while other sports like football, MMA are incredibly complex in the strategic element of it, tennis is not. While tennis is point per
Really?
point, so there's not much. I find this is my opinion. I could be wrong. I don't know. I've played tennis. I don't know that much about it. Right? You're not thinking down the line in tennis. You're just thinking. You might be thinking moves in terms of the one. But every volley that you're playing, there's no. It's its own isolated. There's no thinking down the
I don't know
line.
about that.
There's
Okay.
no strategy. There's no setting someone up. It's all within that one point. Yeah, you could set someone up to do something within that point, but points down the line, what you're doing now has nothing to do.
Well, I'll
There's
say-
there's no deeper strategy.
well,
Could you really? I mean,
okay.
can anyone argue that? Like
Yeah,
in
sure.
football, there's incredible depth and deception
Well-
of strategy that goes both in each individual play and then looking at plays down
Okay, well,
the line. Same thing with baseball, MMA.
Well-
Absolutely, you're setting people up for both the now and the later. But tennis, it's just the now.
No, I disagree. So first of all, so tennis is an individual sport, so we can't compare that to football. Maybe you could compare doubles a little bit, but I'm not a tennis player, so if there are any tennis players that are listeners and you want to give us a better argument, we will gladly read what you have to say next week on the podcast. But I'm gonna give it my shot. So, yes, tennis is point for point. But I've got to imagine you have to be thinking down the line and strategically. But your strategy is more spatial. For tennis and even.
But
like,
it's
you can
only
make
in
the
the
same
moment.
argument
There's
for-
nothing.
But you can make the same argument for MMA.
No,
Why?
you're setting because the leg kicks you're accumulating now will add up for the third round.
So, okay,
you're
okay,
setting
alright,
someone.
fine,
You're
okay.
doing a strategy
Okay.
that someone does it and then you switch. There's so
what if
much
you're-
depth
okay, I got
that
it.
goes both in the moment and over the
So,
entire
okay,
thing. But
would
I
say
just don't
MMA
see
does
that
have
in
a-
tennis.
does have a high level of I guess strategy involved. But okay, let's say you're playing
And
tennis.
there's different dimensions.
Let's
You
say-
can
okay.
fight someone on the ground, and there's
But
a
what about-
completely different level
what
of
about-
strategy.
okay, let's say
but
you're
in tennis,
play-
there's no other.
Again, I'm not a tennis player, but I'm assuming if I have great endurance and I feel like I can outlast somebody, then one strategy might be making them run across the court. So part of your strategy might be, okay, I'm gonna, maybe I'll give
All
up
right.
a couple points to make sure that get them tired, or the placement
seems
of
very-
where
but it's-
you're.
to
I mean,
me,
within a
I
set,
get it.
I guess just the
I get it.
placing where you're placing the ball. You might be thinking 3 or 4 steps down the road, like, okay, I'm gonna put it here so that they go
Of
here.
course, no,
So-
within the set,
so
yes,
there's-
within
I've
that-
got to imagine there's a high. But
within
like,
that-
you can make the same argument for basketball. Then it's just go to the basket, score.
I
You're
do.
point for point.
But there's more. I do believe that about basketball.
Okay. But then
that there isn't that it's just that back and forth. But there is, at least within each play, there's a lot of this.
So what about
and basketball is also a big game of improvisation.
Yeah, but
too.
And tennis isn't.
Tennis is, but there's only so many. There's only so many.
You have one thing
events.
you can do, which is
that's just sort of my opinion.
You hit
on
a
it.
ball with the racket. Like you don't have. There's not a lot going on. It's one human being against another human being hitting a ball against.
But that's just how I feel about it. I've always found it to be, and that's just my bias. It doesn't lessen the athletic.
I need a tennis player to shut Justin up. So yeah,
and I could be
send us
wrong
a
about it.
message.
I just find it personally. I just find tennis painfully boring, and I think it's just
It's
so
a
one-dimensional.
fun sport to watch. I don't think it's one-dimensional.
I find it to be so one-dimensional.
That's
I'm not saying that they're not
any
great
sport's
athletes.
one-dimensional.
No, I don't. I disagree. I think there's depth, and I feel like a game tells a story, but I don't find
tennis doesn't tell.
No, I don't
think so.
think
You've never
so.
watched a good tennis
I've
match.
seen
then.
tons of
Are you
tennis
kidding?
matches.
It doesn't tell a story.
I don't know. It just I don't know.
I think you just don't like the sport, which is fine.
I just
but it's
find
kind of
it
like
boring.
people that watch. Okay, like it's kind of like you sound like people who watch MMA. It's like, oh, it's just two guys laying on top of each other.
No,
That's
because
boring.
I've seen it and I've played it and I
Okay,
get it.
then you're being dismissive of tennis in the same
But
way.
I've
because
played it. I've seen it.
you
I've seen
haven't played
tons of. I played tennis when I
but
was
then
younger.
obviously you don't understand. You're not
I learned the
getting
technique.
Like,
of course, there's new. I'm not taking away from its ability. I never said there wasn't great ability. I'm just saying, as a game, I just find there to be a lot less depth than other sports.
I think it can tell a great story.
Maybe it can. I guess so. One guy fights back. Like I suppose.
Any
but
sport. I mean, that's how any sport works. Though
I just find there to be less depth in it, and I don't know. That's just sort of my.
I'm not the biggest tennis fan in the world, but it's more just I'm not the biggest sports fan in the world. But I enjoy watching it, and I can enjoy a good match. And I do think I don't know, because I've seen tennis matches where they do tell great stories, and it's one of those sports where it does tell, because it's an individual sport. It can tell stories that I think, much like MMA, which we really enjoy. It tells that can tell a story that it's hard to get from other sports because it's one-on-one. But
all right. Well, so. Wow, this was a long one.
Yeah, this was a long one. Hope you enjoyed. I know we didn't talk much fitness, but I think obviously it's the Olympics. It's a fitness type of topic, and we'll be back next week. I think we are going to talk about how fitness can injure you. So that's on tap for next week. Is how exercise hurts you sometimes. A couple interesting stories to share. So, and some research, and hopefully
download the app.
Yeah. If you haven't downloaded the app yet, if you have an iPhone, download it. It should be on Android soon. I just have to take care of some little things, but we should have it on Android as well. Rate us, please. That helps us with our rankings, and all of our other stuff is on the website. So goodbits.com is all of our social media. And that's it. So hope you enjoyed our discussion. I enjoyed.
I'm Justin Guild, aka Chef Sonic.
We are the Goodbits.